Okay. Welcome back. My name is Dean VanEvery. I'm the associate pastor at Grand Avenue Baptist Church, and this is Beyond Foundations. So this is part 7 of my 4-part mini-series on divine simplicity. So in the previous installment, I kind of touched on the relation of revelation, theology, and human reason. So today we're going to kind of pick back up the main topic of divine simplicity and just really kind of dive into a couple of key texts. So we're going to look at Genesis 1 and then Exodus 3. So let's just jump in and let's get to work. So textually, I just want to look at two places, right? One in each of the first 2 books of the Bible, right? These are helpful places to start because they are explicitly aimed at teaching us about God's nature in relation to creation. Both of these are kind of aimed at basically de-paganizing us, right? Both Genesis and Exodus were originally written to a Hebrew people who had just emerged from hundreds of years of captivity in Egypt, right? So one of the big concerns for these people is to get them to think about God in right categories and not in kind of Egyptian pagan categories, right? So Egyptian gods were seen as very much intertwined with creation. They were participants in kind of the matrix of creation, just right alongside everything else. Bigger, yes, more powerful than mortals, but not like metaphysically distinct. So what Genesis 1 and Exodus 3, where we're going to look here in a moment, are trying to do is to help us think about God as something fundamentally distinct from the system of creation. He's not kind of one being among many beings. He's not the highest and best being. He is being in a fundamentally different way than we have being. His existence is radically distinct from ours. There is nothing beside him, nothing behind him, right? He isn't like the best in in the category of things, right? He is his own category entirely. He is completely alone in his category of existence. So neither of these passages give us this like fully baked doctrine of simplicity, but basically, given the choice between simplicity and a composite God, they push us firmly towards simplicity. Okay, first, look at Genesis 1. So Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth," right? So if you are, up to speed on your Hebrew linguistic forms, right, you recognize that this is a merism, right? It's where you use 2 extreme parts of the whole to describe the whole, right? So here we see heaven and earth. When the text says that God created the heavens and the earth, that means that God created everything. We see this in places like Psalm 139, where David says, you know when I rise up and you know when I sit down, right? God knows everything in between too. It's not just like, oh, he stood up. Now I don't know where he is. Lost him. Oh, sat down. There he is. Oh, I don't know where he is. Oh, there he is. Stood up. Right? Like God, that's the 2 extremes of the thing to tell us that God knows the whole, right? So when God says, created the heavens, created the earth, God created everything. So how do we see this spelled out, right? What are the kinds of things that everything includes? So I just want you to notice basically 3 kinds of things that God creates here in Genesis 1. There's most obviously physical reality, right? Light and dark, land and sea, plants and animals. But second, notice the existential categories, and third, notice kind of the conceptual and transcendental categories. So first and most obviously, in Genesis 1, we see God creates physical stuff, right? Verse 2, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God created light. Verse 11, God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation," and it was so. Verse 20, God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures." So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves. Right, so God created the sea creatures. Verse 26, "Let us make man in our image," right? So in Genesis 1, God makes stuff, the physical stuff of reality. That's pretty obvious. But also notice that it isn't just kind of indiscriminate stuff, kind of arranged in random orders. These things are made according to kinds, right? There's a certain existential and essential creation going on as well. God doesn't just make humans, he makes human nature. God doesn't just make cows, he makes cow nature, right? God doesn't just make trees, he makes treeness. So verse 11, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." Verse 21, "So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to its kind. Verse 25, and God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Okay, so not just, livestock, but it's the essences of the various kinds of livestock that God creates. So then last, notice these kind of transcendental evaluations that we see throughout the chapter. It isn't just physical stuff that God creates, and it isn't just categories and these concepts that God makes. It's also the transcendental evaluation of each of these things as good. Verse 10, God called the dry land earth, and the waters were gathered together. They were gathered together, he called seas, and God saw that it was good. Verse 12, God creates vegetation, and God saw that it was good. Verse 25, God creates land animals, and God saw that it was good. Verse 31, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Okay, so all of these things, material things, categories of essence and existence, and even goodness are all created things that are not God. In God, his goodness, his beauty, his truth, his essence, his existence just is his nature. All that is in God is God. But in creatures, all of these things are really distinct. What makes a created thing beautiful is really different than what makes it good, and different than what makes it true. All that to say, that when Genesis 1 says that God created everything, it isn't just talking about physical material, but the very categories and even evaluations that make up the physical and intellectual cosmos around us. So when you read Genesis 1, right, you should see it doing two things. First, just highlighting the diversity and the harmony of creation itself. But then second, it's also highlighting this stark distinction between God, the creator, and the world he created. Right? This world is this beautiful harmony of complementary opposites: light and dark, sea and land, plant and animal, man and woman, all integrated, all dancing in God's beauty of creation. But God is the radical unity at the base and the core of that harmonious diversity. God is the uncreated unity at the base of the cosmos of created harmony. Right, so you can kind of think of it like a symphony and the conductor. Right, the symphony is made up of diverse and complementary parts, but is held together and even made harmonious by the conductor, who himself is both distinct from the symphony and is himself singular. That there's no diversity in composition in the conductor. To me, I think this is a helpful picture, right? Picture just this huge symphony, all kind of arrayed with their diverse instruments, all kind of arced around the conductor, all moving in just seemingly uncoordinated and chaotic movements, and yet the result is this beautiful and moving unified whole. Unity brought about through diversity. And they can be unified precisely because the one at the center orchestrating it all is himself one and not many. Okay, so at this point, you'll likely have a question, and we will get to that. We will get to that question, but at the end, we're going to attempt to spend a little bit of time kind of tackling that at the end. So save it until then. We will circle back to that. Okay, so that's Genesis 1. So next, I wanted to touch briefly Exodus 3. We kind of saw it referenced a couple of times already. Charnock referenced this verse earlier. We saw him talking about it. Owen referenced this verse earlier. It came up in a few others. So this verse, this passage, Exodus 3:15, comes right at the very start of Exodus. Right? If you're familiar with the story, this comes from Moses' encounter with God at the burning bush, when God sends Moses back to Egypt to set the slaves free. So again, the big question here for the Israelites, for Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and for the reader is this: who is God? Pharaoh even asks this exact question: who is this God? This God of the Israelites, is he stronger than the gods of Egypt? And this verse kind of is more or less God's answer to that central question. Moses asked God to tell him his name, and God responds, "I am who I am. Tell the people, I am has sent me to you." So names, especially names for gods, are meant to tell us something about the thing. But to do that, as I've already kind of said, you have to kind of go more basic, right? More simple. For God, the true God, there's nothing more basic than himself. So he gives kind of the most comprehensible answer that he can. I am. So what God is doing here is basically saying that the reason that he alone is able to overpower the whole pantheon of Egyptian gods is precisely that they are nothing more than puffed up, created composite spirits. But he himself is the uncreated, simple Father of all spirits. He alone is the uncreated creator. He alone is the I am. For him, nothing but raw, undifferentiated being can even come close to being a fitting name for him. He is the absolute, the first that Owen was talking about. So, textually, what's kind of interesting about this phrase here in Exodus 3 is that it could really be translated as past tense, as present tense, or future tense, right? It could read, I have been, or it could read, I am, or it could even read, I will be. And so there's been some debate about that, about which is best kind of down through the years. But there's a decent argument, I think, to be made that the kind of the ambiguity of that is a feature. It's kind of intended, and it's not really a bug to be solved. So when God introduces himself much later on in the scriptures, when God introduces himself to the Apostle John in the beginning of Revelation, he uses similar language. And it's kind of an interestingly parallel situation, right? So he spoke to Moses in a cave during Moses' exile to send him with a message of deliverance to his people in Egyptian captivity. And now he speaks to John in a cave during John's exile to send him with a message of deliverance to his people in Roman captivity. So he even uses some of the same language to introduce himself, but kind of in classic like New Testament style. What was kind of foggy and misty in the Old Testament is made clear in the New. He says in Revelation 1 verse 8, I am the Alpha and the Omega, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty. So God kind of skips all the ambiguity now. Now it's crystal clear. He is the absolute. He was, he is to come. So in Exodus, when God says, I am, well, did you mean I have been? Did you mean I am? Did you mean I will be? And God says, yes. So what's the point? In both Exodus and then here in Revelation, God is held out basically as the most kind of fundamental reality. He's the beginning and the end. He is before and after all that is. He is the uncreated, the absolute, the unconditioned one. There's nothing that comes before God, nothing that undergirds God, nothing that his existence is rooted in and based on except his own necessary being, his own absolute existence. There's nothing more basic, nothing more fundamental than God. There's nothing that causes God or comprises God or makes up God. God is just God all the way down. All right, I want to just add a little bit here. Again, this is just some comments from post-production. So hopefully you remember what I talked about in the closing theme of the last episode on Revelation and theology. So something is necessarily contained in the Bible. It's logically required by biblical teaching if the middle term of a valid syllogism is explicit in the text. If you need a refresher on what that means, go and listen to kind of the last 5 or 10 minutes or so of the last episode. So what is the explicit teaching of this passage in Exodus? Right. So among other things, the explicit teaching is that God is self-existent. He does not exist in or from other things. So Jesus kind of picks this idea up in John 5 when he's trying to teach his own divine equality with the Father. So in John 5 verse 26, Jesus says, "For as the Father has life in himself, so he has granted the Son also to have life in himself." So divine life, the life that the Father has and the life that the Father has eternally generated the Son to share is absolutely independent. Divine life is life in and from himself. So I heard this illustration, not even illustration, but just point one time from someone, I can't remember exactly who. I heard them make the point that the burning bush here in Exodus 3 is actually an object lesson of this truth that God is trying to communicate with his name. So Exodus 3 verse 2 says, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. Right. So there's fire in the bush, but the bush isn't getting burned up. Right. That's odd. Right. So how fire works is that it exists in and from the thing that it's consuming. Right. As it burns, it consumes its host, right? So then when the host is all spent up, the fire burns out, right? So fire just can't exist in and from itself, but it exists in and from something else. But this fire that Moses saw was unique. It was in the bush, but it didn't exist from the bush. This fire was a divine fire. At least as far as his bush is concerned, it existed in and from itself. So this self-existent fire that's not dependent, doesn't exist in anything else, is a picture of the self-existent God that God is trying to communicate when he gives his name to Moses. It's a picture of what God's divine name, I am, or I am that I am, means. So what's the explicit teaching of Exodus 3:15? That God exists independently. There is nothing beyond God that he exists in or from. He is the absolute independent one. So back to our syllogisms. Our divine simplicity syllogism could go like this. Major premise. Whatever is made up of parts exists in and from those parts. Right? Kind of think of a brick building. That the brick house exists in and from the bricks that it is made up of. Get rid of the bricks, you have no more house, right? The house exists in its parts. You exist in and from your parts, your body, your soul, your personality, your history, your hair color, all of that. Take away those things and you are taken away, right? You exist in and from your parts. Okay, so that's what I mean by this. So again, major premise, whatever is made up of parts exists in and from those parts. House out of bricks, right? Minor premise, God does not exist in anything but himself, and that's just Exodus 3:15. That's explicit in the text. God does not exist in anything but himself. So conclusion, therefore, God is not made up of parts, right? Major premise, whatever is made up of parts exists in and from those parts. God does not exist in anything but himself. Therefore, God is not made up of parts. This is a syllogism that takes basically the form of if A, then B, and then it negates the second part. It negates B, says if A, then B, but not B, therefore not A, right? Do some more research on that if you want to know more of what I'm talking about, or ignore it. That's fine. Another way that you could kind of frame this idea will be this. Major premise, whatever is composed of parts is dependent on those parts. Like again, the house is ontologically dependent on the bricks. And then minor premise, God is absolutely independent. He is not dependent on anything. Again, that's just explicit Exodus 3:15. Therefore, God is not composed of parts. Right? Whatever is composed of parts is dependent on those parts. That's the general principle. We can argue about that. We can debate about that, but that's just unavoidable. I don't know how you could possibly refute that. Whatever is composed of parts is dependent on those parts. Minor premise, God is absolutely independent. He is dependent on nothing. Exodus 3:15. Conclusion, therefore, God is not composed of parts. So that's just kind of an illustration of how we can say that simplicity is necessarily required, necessarily contained in Exodus 3:15. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Hopefully it adds more light, not more darkness, more clarity, not more confusion. If nothing else, hopefully it just gives you some more concrete handles to even know what I'm trying to say, so you can kind of dig into it a little bit more as time goes on. So let's just get back into it. So next, all I'm going to do is just kind of wrap things up, try to tie a little bow on this whole project and give you some concluding thoughts. So I do have, this will be fun, I do have one little bonus episode that's going to come out tomorrow. So it'll just be an interesting topic that is kind of related to this. I recorded it when I recorded the whole, episode, what was originally episode 4, this whole big thing. So I decided to keep it in there, but it's not really fleshed out. It'll be kind of an interesting food for thought kind of a thing. So you can find that. I think that's going to be maybe 10 minutes, or less. So, that'll be tomorrow. Anyways, let's jump back into it and I'll kind of conclude it here, tie some bows on some things and we'll be done. Okay. So what is divine simplicity? What does it mean? Kind of round and third here. So divine simplicity means that basically God is not composed of any kind of parts. God is not composed of physical parts. He is spirit. Divine simplicity means that God is not composed of conceptual parts, right? All that is in God is God. All of his attributes are identical with his nature. Divine simplicity means that God is not composed of existential parts. His essence is his existence. what God is the same as that God is. He is absolutely necessary with no hint of contingency to his existence. So that's simplicity in a nutshell. So why does this matter? Again, this matters primarily because simplicity should shape everything about how we think about God. First, is God different from creation? Is he really the creator of all that is, or are there things, even concepts, kind of more basic to the universe than God? Is goodness an expression of God's nature, or is goodness kind of an ideal that God is striving himself to live up to? So second, this shapes the other attributes, right? If God is not simple, then he's mutable, he's changeable. Composition implies the possibility of change. If God is made up of parts, then change must be possible. Physical composition implies the potential for physical decomposition or kind of recomposition. Conceptual composition implies the potential to acquire new attributes or to change their proportion, more love, more justice, less mercy, less whatever, right? Or change which ones are expressed at any given time. Or I'm going to do justice here, but then I'm going to do love over there. I'm going to do goodness here, but then I'm going to do wisdom over there. Right? And then metaphysical composition implies the possibility for essence and existence to be distinct, which would mean that God could cease to exist, or that at one point God came into being. So if God is immutable, if God can't change, he must be simple. Composition requires the possibility of change. So again, like I mentioned earlier, if God is simple, then we know that his attributes are never in conflict or even tension, right? His love is his justice, is his wisdom, just is his divine nature. If God is for you, then all of God is undividedly for you. So last, and really this is just a summary of the others, we need to get simplicity right in order to get God right. If he is compound, just like us, then he is a creature, just like us. God really is beyond us in every way. He isn't just kind of a bigger and better version of us. When we look at the sun, it should make us squint, right? We can't grasp what God is. We can't grasp the nature and essence of God. If we could, he wouldn't be God. So simplicity keeps us humble in our theology. You just can't master God. You can't bring him down to our level. He is beyond us. And that's a good thing. Okay, that's all I have for this. So let me give you just a quick summary of some of the major ideas. Simplicity is the basic affirmation that there is nothing behind God. There's nothing more ontologically basic than God. Everything in creation is made up of things more basic than themselves. At the bottom of all of this is the uncreated, simple God. Simplicity affirms that there are no physical parts in God. He is a spirit. He cannot change, and that's a really good thing. Simplicity also affirms that there are no conceptual parts in God. Justice, love, mercy, compassion, power, knowledge, all the rest are not kind of attributes that are themselves more basic than God, right? They don't ground what God is. They don't compose God. Rather, God actually grounds them. These attributes are a dim, and when we see them in creatures, are a dim and imperfect reflection of God himself. But then simplicity also affirms that there are no existential parts in God. His essence is his existence. For God to be God and to exist are the same thing. And again, this doctrine, kind of far from kind of contradicting or straining the doctrine of the Trinity, actually undergirds it and protects it. Since God is not composed of parts, the three persons are not parts of God, but are subsistences in the one divine nature. Nor are they these diminishing degrees of divinity, nor are they these three distinct instantiations of divinity. The Father is all of God, the Son is all of God, the Spirit is all of God. So hopefully this is somewhat helpful. Honestly, my hope is that this will simply serve to just lay some groundwork. Hopefully this just helps give you even some questions to ask, some things to be chewing on. So in a few days on September 13th, I'll be digging into the attributes kind of more generally. It's going to be much higher level, and hopefully a bit easier to digest. But this should just kind of help to prime the pump for you, hopefully. This God that we serve, that we worship, that sent his son to die for us, is very different from us. Even in the ways that he's like us, or that we are like him, he is still very, very different from us. God is love, completely, simply, undividedly. God is justice, completely, simply, undividedly. God is power, completely, simply, undividedly. God is wisdom, completely, simply, undividedly. Sometimes, and in varying degrees, we can more or less reflect God's love, God's justice, God's power, and God's wisdom, but always mixed in together and always with varying degrees of selfishness and corruption and weakness and foolishness. So this is a hard topic, and I coming to the end of it, I just feel like I haven't done it justice. I'm already thinking, man, how could I have done this better? How could I have done this differently? I just feel like I'm leaving so much unaddressed, and so many things that I did address, all I've done is make them confusing. So hopefully this will just spark some interest for you, and perhaps maybe even just kind of get the ball rolling for you to really start to wrestle with this a little bit more, maybe with somebody who has a little bit better things to say on the topic. So. Um, May the Lord have mercy on you for my frailty and my foolishness.